And though they didn't have many guns, these guns were world beaters. They were super heavy, fast-firing, high muzzle velocity cannon. You only needed one hit and you probably had scored.
By 1944, the Red Air Force is on the offensive, and Luftwaffe bombers are no longer capable of threatening Moscow. Stalin decides that the Strahler is no longer needed, and Moskaliev's design workshop is closed down by the secret police. The supersonic rocket fighter is abandoned, and Moskalev is lucky to escape with his life. Yet, despite the constant danger of being arrested if you have radical ideas, Soviet aircraft designers go on to propose unorthodox solutions to problems. Even by today's standards, their ideas are astonishing. On the eve of World War II, Russian collective farm workers turn their eyes skyward. They think they can hear the sound of an approaching aircraft, but they can see nothing. Flying overhead is the world's first attempt at a stealthy aircraft.
Well, the Soviet aircraft designers are always interested in imaginative, forward-looking, futuristic types of airplanes. In fact, in the 1930s, curiously, they even had some experiments on building an invisible airplane.
These are the days before radar, but the aircraft of the day are still visible targets. They fly slow enough to be spotted easily through binoculars, and they fly too low to escape the deadly attention of anti-aircraft artillery. One Soviet designer has an answer. He strips the Soviet Air Force plane of its outer covering of wood and replaces it with clear plastic.
It was a four-seat, single-engined, high-wing monoplane, a very ordinary aeroplane. He stripped out as much as he could of all the existing structure, and he covered it with a transparent fabric which he got from France called rhodoid, which was very much like cellophane.
The aircraft is now largely transparent to the human eye. Of course, the engine and crew can still be seen. But at altitude, they're too small to pick out. There is only one problem.
The problem was that the plastic he was using reacted to sunlight. And after a few weeks, the transparency was lost and you could see the plane again.
A true stealthy aircraft will have to wait another 50 years. Another problem Soviet aircraft engineers are grappling with is airborne warfare. The Red Army is the first to create a large parachute force, but paratroopers are lightly armed and defenseless against enemy tanks. There are early attempts to carry light tanks and artillery into battle, slung under heavy bombers, but the aircraft cannot transport heavy weapons. Another brilliant Soviet engineer has a radical solution to this problem. He is Oleg Antonov.
Oleg Antonov emerged as one of the Soviet Union's most prominent aircraft designers in the 20th century. As a young man, he was interested in gliders. Later on, he presided over the design of a whole series of Soviet aircraft transports, heavy lift aircraft. Perhaps his most unusual project was a so-called flying tank, where they attached wings to literally a tank and used it as a flying machine.
This strange aircraft is called the KT, which stands for Tank's Wings in Russian. A T-60 tank provides the fuselage of the unit, with the tank's tracks being the landing gear. A biplane wing made of wood and fabric is attached, together with a pair of tail booms for stability. The unit is towed to its target by a heavy bomber. Towing speed is 100 miles per hour. Over the target, the flying tank is released and glides to a landing near the battlefield. The wings are dropped as soon as the tank lands. The tank can then move instantly into combat.
Only one KT was ever built, and this was tested in early 1942. And the pilot was one of the most varied and experienced pilots there's ever been, Sergei Anokhin. And they waved away the tug. Off went the combination, and Anokhin broke the tow rope at about 6,000 feet, and he managed to steer this contraption back to the airfield. and we are told he made a rather rough landing. Well, if the idea is if it's a landing you can walk away from, it's a landing.
It would be the only flight of the flying tank.
The problem was not the concept of a flying tank that you could tow. The problem was there were not powerful enough engines for the towing aircraft to really fly the tank any great distance.
Russia's tanks will have to drive to Berlin under their own steam. But along with flying tanks, Soviet thinking about the use of aircraft for naval warfare would lead to another idea that is truly brilliant. Russia's tanks will have to drive to Berlin under their own steam. But along with flying tanks, Soviet thinking about the use of aircraft for naval warfare would lead to another idea that is truly breathtaking. Early submarines were very slow. They were also vulnerable to attack while traveling on the surface to recharge their electric batteries. On the other hand, aircraft could fly fast and high, but they did not have a submarine's invisibility when submerged.
The junior naval officers in the Soviet Union were very resourceful. And in the early 30s, they came up with the idea, why not combine the strengths of a submarine with the strengths of an aircraft?
In July 1936, the Soviet military's main scientific research committee approves a detailed design study for a flying submarine. It is known as the LPL, after the Russian letters for Flying Submarine Aircraft. For flight, the LPL is powered by 3 conventional piston engines. It carries a crew of 3 and flies at 150 miles per hour with a range of 500 miles. When the aircraft lands on water, panels close to seal the flight engines. The aircraft is painted with corrosion-resistant materials, and it is armed with 2 18-inch torpedoes carried under the fuselage. When submerged, the machine has a speed of 3 knots.
The idea was that the flying submarine would be able to penetrate a heavily defended harbour by flying over the mines and the submarine nets, then submerge and attack the battleships and aircraft carriers that thought they were in safety inside the harbour.
But the technical challenges prove too much for the Russians, and the flying sub is never completed.
The idea of a flying submarine sounds far-fetched, but in fact, during the Cold War in the 1950s, the United States Navy commissioned its own design study for a flying submarine.
The Convair Division of General Dynamics Corp in San Diego was asked to draw up plans for just such an aircraft, this time powered by a jet engine. The craft would be submerged by flooding the wings, tail, and hull compartments. It would travel 5 miles an hour underwater, powered by batteries.
The flying submarine has never got off the drawing board because it's just too complicated an engineering project.
But there was one other new technology that did revolutionize aviation in World War II: the jet plane. In the 1930s, Soviet aircraft designers realized that to attain greater speeds, they will need to develop new kinds of engines. The limiting speed for any aircraft using a propeller is about 500 miles per hour. Soon, the Soviets lead the world in the development of the ramjet.
Various designers had ideas for rockets and for weird things called ramjets. They're really just tubes, but with a careful profile, big inlet, then it narrows to a high velocity section in the middle where you inject fuel, which burns, and expands through an enlarged tailpipe to give thrust. The basic idea couldn't be simpler. It's as simple as a rocket engine.
A ramjet uses the forward speed of an aircraft in flight to squeeze air into a nozzle. This compressed air is rich in explosive oxygen.
There was quite a bit to be said for putting ramjets under the wings or in the tail of a fighter to boost the speed. Hardly anybody ever did it except the Russians, and they did it in a big way.
Early ramjets are tried out on the I-16 fighter. These experiments prove successful. Stalin orders a new ramjet fighter. Work begins in 1940. The result is one of the most advanced and beautiful aircraft designs of the Second World War, the Barakov D fighter.
The Borovkov D was a 1941 aircraft design. It was a twin-boom aircraft with a 2,000 horsepower pusher engine, a piston-powered engine, supplemented with ramjets and armed with 20 and 37 millimeter cannon.
The plane includes a host of revolutionary features, as well as ramjets fitted in the twin tail booms. It has swept wings and is even equipped with an ejector seat. Had the Borovkov D been ready in 1941, its speed and firepower could have destroyed the lumbering Luftwaffe bombers and easily evaded German fighters.